have PDs that were incredibly protective of the brand, and understandably so, but it would be so much so that they wouldn't touch certain things because it was going to mess up the sound of the station. And we took a lot of that incredibly seriously. I don't know if we look back at it and go, maybe that was we were a little too serious about stuff, but we certainly did in that era.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll tell you a quick story.
Please.
When I was at DOS, I went to Sunny, and our program director was a guy by name, you may know him, Chuck Knight.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Chuck Knight, was he in San Diego at one point?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
And San Antonio, I think.
Yeah.
Great guy. He and I were very close. He came to my wedding and all that. But he and I were in a discussion in a promotion meeting, and he was shaking his finger at me from across the desk. And I said, if you don't stop shaking that finger at me, I'm going to bite it off and shove it up your ass. So, yes, we're all very protected. And then I heard a voice from the other side of the room that said, my money's on Forgy.
Benztown President Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
My next guest is a true force in the radio industry. His journey started in Dayton, Ohio, and along the way, he has worked at legendary stations like KPLX in Dallas, WCOL in Columbus. He once held the monthly and annual sales records for all of Susquehanna and has run radio stations for Nationwide, Radio 1, and Wilkes Broadcasting. You've seen him on the cover of Radio Inc. He's been recognized in their editions of Best General Managers, Best Leaders, and has been named among the top 40 most powerful people in radio. He currently serves on the board of the NAB, the RAB Executive Committee, and the Broadcasters Foundation of America, and just recently was honored with the prestigious Leadership Award by the Broadcasters Foundation of America for his remarkable service to both our industry and the communities he serves. He's a passionate leader, a fierce advocate for radio, and someone I deeply admire. Please welcome Chris Forgy, the CEO of Saga Communications. Chris, welcome, man.
Thank you, Chachi. I'd really like to meet that guy. I could have written that letter myself. Thank you very much. Wow, I didn't realize I had done all those things.
Man, it is such an honor and a privilege to we've worked with you in full disclosure for many years at Saga, and it's been a phenomenal partnership and more importantly, friendship. But I have really just gotten to know you, I'd say, closer over the last couple years, and you truly inspired me at the Leadership Awards. You gave this tremendous speech. The Broadcasters Foundation of America, they hold a leadership breakfast every year right at the NAB, and Chris was honored this year. And your speech was candidly the most touching I have ever, it was certainly one of the most touching I've ever heard, period, but certainly the most touching at that event, man. And can we dive into that first, and then we'll get into your career? But I'd love to talk about where that motivation comes from, and then some poem that you recited.
So thank you for that. That means a lot to me because as you saw in my remarks, I was told a long time ago to make sure that I love to speak, by the way. I can't say when they told me I had 3 minutes for my remarks, I said I can't say hello in 3 minutes. but I said to them, as a speaker, there's really two things that I always try to remember. One is to know your content, and number two is to speak from your heart. And so when something is that close to my heart, as I shared with you as well, the emotions bubble up. And, I shared my why with everyone in the room, and I can share that with you again if you'd like at some point. But my why cross-cuts both my professional and my personal life. And so when we were building culture and reestablishing culture after Ed Christian's passing 2 years ago, I really took all the things that I had learned, and some I had deployed into the company already. But at that point, I was really free to do everything that I would have liked to have done, and for several reasons didn't. And it all really started with the great acronym that I shared. The great in Sagaverse stands for gratitude, respect, enthusiasm, accountability, and teamwork. So when people ask us, what's the culture like at Saga? It's very easy to remember because there's really two basic things. One, the acronym for great, and a story that I heard while my wife and I were on a dolphin excursion off the coast of North Carolina several years ago. And the ship captain said, have you ever been on a dolphin excursion before? I said, no, never have. He started giving us a little education, and he said, did you know that dolphins swim in schools like fish, even though they're mammals. I said, no, I didn't know that. And he said, a lot of times these dolphins will swim in schools together, and there will be dolphins that will either get injured or sick. And during that period of time, whether they're either preparing to pass or to get better and gain strength, other dolphins swim up underneath them to help them get above the water to catch air and then go back under and swim as they, like I said, either prepare to pass or to get their strength back to swim on their own. And during this time, there are predators that come and try to kill the sick dolphin, and the school fights the predators off. And so I said, in our company, we swim like dolphins swim, and we protect one another. I have a saying that says, don't mess with me, my money, or my people. Those are just some real simple principles that drive the culture in our company. And it, as they say, the fish rots at the head. I had one of our air personalities. I was in the market in Ocala the other day, and one of them said in a question to me, how do we know when we're heard, we're being heard, and by our leadership team? And I said, let me ask you a question. I talk to you frequently, right? Yeah. Do you feel heard when you talk to me? Yes. Good. The fish rots at the head. Just remember that. So everything that we do in our market starts at the top, and the culture permeates all the way down through.
I love that. And thank you so much for sharing it. And thank you. Well, I want to talk about the poem. Actually, we'll save that for the end, because it's one of the most touching poems I've ever heard. And I actually shared it with the Benztown staff here when I got back.
I heard about this. Thank you. I'm flattered. I heard about that.
I think your leadership style is so incredibly important, especially when we're going through the times that we're going through right now. And it's been a challenging quarter. You know, the industry's got some challenges. We've got tariffs that we're contending with, and a lot of things in the marketplace that's causing some disruptions. And so I think to be a leader and to have that kind of culture and to swim like those dolphins swim, where you're protecting each other, is honestly more relevant than it's ever been.
It really is. And a lot of the disruption that we've created in our company was done intentionally, because we also knew that in order for us to be able to continue to swim, I'll use that analogy now, is in order for us to continue to swim and do it successfully, we had to change and we had to catch up. Because I don't think it's any big secret that we were a little bit behind in getting to the digital game. And so we had to run very, very fast to get there. And so in the midst of, as you said, all this general disruption in the sector and in media in general, and then in the economy, we intentionally created this additional disruption. You know, we kind of lived in the house while we were rebuilding the house and, or remodeling the house. And that too had its own challenges, because you have those people that are I'll call them the naysayers, or they're the people that don't want you to win and doubt that you will. Have you ever heard of the crabs in a barrel syndrome?
I have not.
So there's a story that says that there are some out there, and you'll recognize them as soon as I mention them, is if you put crabs in a barrel, this is true. Some will try to crawl out of the barrel. Others will just sit there. And then there are those that will grab those who are trying to crawl out of the barrel and pull them back down, not in an effort to get out, just so they don't.
Interesting. That's really fascinating. Like some sort of instinctual survival mechanism.
That's right. And so you have those that say, I don't want you to succeed, and I don't really want to succeed, but I don't want you to succeed.
That's really fascinating. We're going through a similar situation in that most of our revenue, about 70% of it, is derived from over-the-air inventory. So we exchange, whether it's a library or a voiceover imaging or a show, for commercial time. And that commercial time in our particular case is sold by Westwood One or Compass. And the demand, unfortunately, and the value of that inventory over the years has certainly, we've seen some erosion, and it's not worth what it once was. But this year in particular, it's been incredibly choppy, just given the environment economically and so forth. And so we're right now trying to figure out ways through Triton and a couple other partners and how we can start to monetize digitally as well, because we're hearing and seeing that digital inventory is actually going up in value, while the over-the-air inventory, sadly, is declining in value.
Yes, in value.
Yeah.
And you know, if I may, you filled me with some very nice compliments, and I appreciate that. I'm humbled by that. I also say that Benztown has been a critical piece to our success in the area of spec spot production. We do somewhere between 25 and 30,000 spec spots a year. And many of what we do is the stuff we do with Benztown and have been over the past several years.
We appreciate that, man. And we love working with you and your team over there. You've got just a great group of programmers, and thank you for the continued support. Let's dive into more about you, and I want to hear about growing up, and tell me about as a child and what that was like.
So I had parents that, as I mentioned in my remarks at the BFOA awards dinner, my parents were ones who really encouraged me to try new things and do the things that maybe were the most challenging. And if I really was willing to pay the price, that I could have anything I wanted to. And they encouraged me in all that I did. They encouraged me that I could have a vision and have discipline and be tough and be assertive and lead and challenge others and still be a good man at the same time. And that's really, the biggest compliment I can be paid is when somebody says to me, "You're unlike any CEO I've ever talked to." And I hear that frequently, frankly. And I always respond with thank you, because that is a huge compliment, because that's an intention. That's something I do deliberately not to be that way. Not anything against CEOs. That's just not who I am. And I can still be all the things that a CEO is, and then some.
You have an authenticity about you, and this isn't to knock other CEOs at all, but you've got a very relatability. I feel like I could go and have a beer with you and hang out, which I think is incredibly cool.
It's a date.
Yeah. So your dad was an account executive, correct?
So my dad was in radio. He retired at age 76. And so I'm kind of a radio rat. And I used to go to work with him on Saturdays. Back in those days, in the early to late mid 60s, they would have sales meetings on Saturdays. So 8 o'clock sales meetings on Saturdays, on Saturday morning. And I would go into the office with him in downtown Dayton. He worked for another big brand, WING, in Dayton, and home of Steve Kirk and Terry Dorsey and John King and all these really great talents. And I would go and mess around in the print room, because they had a print room where they actually would print up cards of the disc jockeys, and you could have them autographed. I mean, it was all of that. And that's where I met Deborah Perenni. She was working I was 9 years old, and she was working in the print room.
Oh, no kidding. I did not know that. I knew that she lived in Dayton, but I didn't know that you guys worked together. How funny is that?
We've known each other for a long time, and she's just done wonderful things. And so at that time, there were also concerts going on that night. The artists would come in. There's a studio that the window would look outside onto Main Street in downtown
Dayton.
Cool. And they'd broadcast. And you'd see people like the Jackson 5, the Cowsills, Elvis Presley, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Don McLean. I mean, all these people that would come in and do these interviews live in the window on Saturday morning before they did their concert that evening. And I get to meet, at least say hello and get autographs from all these different people. But even then, I wasn't hooked. I understood and liked what my dad did. I really thought that it was really cool, because he always brought us free promo version records that he would bring home every night. Oh, yeah.
Did you keep those, by the way?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
that's awesome. I've heard stories where people have unfortunately given their collections away, and that's cool.
No, I kept them. I mean, that's where I gained my love of music, because, first of all, my parents are opera singers, and my mom was a mezzo soprano. My dad was a baritone bass.
Oh, fascinating. So they're artistic then.
Beautiful singers. Oh, my gosh. My sister was on Broadway for 30 years. My other sister went to Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. So very musical family. And we did a lot of singing, a lot together. I sang in bands and all of that. But yet that's where I think I got my love and appreciation for music. But it didn't draw me completely into radio. I went to college in pre-med to be a physical therapist.
No kidding.
My dad got me a job working in an advertising agency with one of his clients. His name was Dave Marshall, I'll never forget. He owned the Z-Bart franchises in Dayton, and he also had an advertising agency where we did print work. And I was literally laying out print work with one of those little machines that you turn the dial and the letter pops in and you make a letter and
yeah,
rip them together. And that's how we did it in those days. And I would see all these people walking in and out of the office with these great suits and these really cool ties, and women with these great purses and hair all coiffed. And you look outside and they have nice cars they're pulling away in. And
glamorous.
I said to Dave Marshall, I said, what do they do? Well, they're in sales. I said, I want to do that. So I changed my major and got into marketing, communications, and psychology.
That's amazing. Were your parents supportive of that? I'm assuming they were. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
In fact, my dad and I worked together for Great Trails Broadcasting. I sold for the FM and he sold for the AM for a period of time.
Oh, that's really cool.
That was
I bet. I'm sure you learned a lot. He was a mentor to you?
He definitely was a mentor to me. He instilled to me what I call the soft skills that, as I talk to our people about, that if we don't get that right, nothing else works. So that's where he was my mentor in learning what I call the soft skills or the interpersonal skills that are so critical in what we do.
Radio's always been a business where you've had to move up and down the dial. Was that something as a kid? Did you guys travel quite a bit or move, or was your dad in Dayton most of his career?
My dad did the same thing I did. I went to the same elementary school, middle school, high school. My parents, he had opportunities to go elsewhere, and he listened to the family. We didn't want to move. He had opportunities to go to Louisville, some other areas like that, and we just said we don't want to move. We want to be, we were kind of set in where we grew up in Centerville, Ohio. And when I became a father and my kids got into elementary school, I said, I'm not moving my kids until they get out of high school. So I too had lots of opportunities to go elsewhere and opted not to do that because it was that important that they go through all the grades of school in the same school system. That might sound a little crazy, but
no, I really respect that. And being a father first and foremost is incredibly admirable. And I think to give up the temptations of moving and taking other gigs is a sacrifice, but probably one worth giving.
Yeah, and after they got into college, then I started moving around a little bit more.
Yeah,
quite a bit more actually. But.
You moved to Columbus on your 21st birthday, and you got a job at BNS. Tell me a little bit about that and the birthday card.
Yeah, so I was 19 years old, 18 when I got into radio, 19 when I had my first sales job. I was going to present my dad's boss. I was working at that print shop I was telling you about, and I presented a direct mail idea, took it to the general manager. His name was Alan Gray. He's no longer with us. And he said, look, I don't want to buy this, but I want to hire you. And so would you come to work for us? I said, sure. My dad didn't want me to, but I did anyway, against his wishes. That's when we worked together. And then about a year later, I wanted to move to a bigger market. And I had kind of Columbus on the tracker. And I did some research and found WBNS Radio's family held. They own the newspaper, radio, TV. Said, that's good. I like that. And so I reached out to a guy named Tom Stewart, who ultimately ended up being my boss. I sent him a resume and then I went up for an interview and he met me and he said, Chris, you're not even old enough to buy a client a drink. I can't hire you. You're 19 years old. And I said, okay, I'll remember that. So I went back and worked at WING for a period of time. And on my 21st birthday, I sent him my birthday card. One of the birthday cards I got, and I said, I now can buy a client a drink. About 3 months later, I was working for him.
Amazing. Let's delve deeper into the sales process. Was that something, you're obviously naturally a very good speaker and have got a tremendous personality. Was the sales process something that came natural to you, or was that a skill that really you had to hone in on? Is that a young age, and in sales, there's a lot of rejection that comes along with that, and it can start to eat at your personal ethos a bit. And how did you handle all that?
So obviously I had a really good teacher in my dad who knew a lot about the industry and knew everyone in town. Literally everyone. So I was always a conversationalist, loved to chat and learn more about other people. I was more interested in them than I was in me. So I would really listen and to what they had to say, not wait just for me to talk and not listen to them. So that's usually what happens when you talk to somebody. They're more interested in what they have to say, so they don't hear what you say. And like I said to you before, is two things that are critical is one, be familiar with your content and speak from your heart. So I learned that very early on. So it was the sales process that I had to learn because I'd always want to go off script, and we're just, let's have some fun here, as opposed to, the process. So it took a little while for me to learn the process of selling. The concept was easy, but I always focused on the words. And later somebody said to me, don't focus on the words, focus on the purpose. What do you want to accomplish? Don't focus on the words you're saying. Focus on where you want to go with those words.
Oh, I like that. That's a great piece of advice.
So that was helpful. I had a lot of really, really great people who were willing to reach back and to help me grow. So that's really what motivates me to do that for other people.
Do you remember your first sale?
I do. I sure do. It was a men's hairstyling where I used to get my hair cut in Centerville, Ohio. I said, where do I go call on first? And I was, still going to school. This was a summer job. And they said, go call on somebody practice in a low-risk situation. I was so nervous. And this guy was a friend of ours. I got my hair cut there. They sold Redken. I do remember that. HQ, that's it. HQ men's haircutters. And I went in and made the pitch. And it was a coupon, like a direct mail coupon that was mailed in their zip code. And he bought it and was a customer for a long time.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. That rush when you make that sale. There's
let's go get another one.
So you move to Columbus and you become an AE at BNS. You're now 21. What was, Columbus isn't super far from Dayton, but now you're living on your own in a different town. What was that like?
Yeah, it was cool. It was, again, I had a really good mentor in Tom Stewart, and he was tough and demanding and also very compassionate. And I became really good friends with him. It was hard to leave there to go to Dallas because I was there like a year and a half. And, Chachi, I was on a track where I was always looking, I got to go to that. What's the next biggest thing? I learned an awful lot. That's when we signed the Ohio State Buckeye football contract. That was the first year. We paid $1 million for a 3-year contract in Ohio State. Now try to get those terms today.
Yeah. But back then that was a lot of money.
That's a ton of money.
Yeah.
And, so at that point I handled Anheuser-Busch. So that was a lot of fun being able to work, on the network. I had Anheuser-Busch for the network sale. So, we only had 4 network sponsors, Ohio Bell, Anheuser-Busch, which you probably don't remember Ohio Bell, but, that was what became Ameritech, and then on and on.
That's a really big deal. You're 22 years old and you're working on a corporate account like Anheuser-Busch.
Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah.
And that account was about $500,000 by itself. And that was in 1984 or 3.
Which is
right in that range.
A really big deal. It goes to show you that the faith that the management had in you and the job that you must have done to work on an account of that stature.
Yeah, it was fun. And so we did that. And again, a friend of mine by the name of Terry Dorsey, who I met in Dayton, he left and got a job with KPLX in Dallas, Texas for Susquehanna. And he and I stayed in close contact. He said, Chris, you got to get out here. This is awesome. And he was, the number one personality. He and Ron Chapman on the air, and Tom Joyner was in Dallas at that time.
That's when he was the fly jock, right? Tom Joyner, going back and forth to Chicago.
Yep. KKDA, was it? I believe. Yeah.
I think so.
And he said, you got to get out of here. So I moved my wife and my son, young son at the time, didn't know anybody, had no list, no nothing, we just moved. And
you're doing well in Columbus. You've got Anheuser-Busch. I'm sure you've got a great local account list that you've put together. And so that's a big leap of faith. But you saw the opportunity to go to a top 10 market and really, lever up, I guess, in terms of what the potential could be, and took that. What did your wife feel at that time? Was she
cried for 6 months.
Oh, jeez.
Every day.
Oh, man.
Didn't have any family there. Nothing. Ultimately ended up being the end of that marriage.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But we did have 3 children together, and they're doing great, and got 7 grandkids between my wife's kids and my kids. They're all my kids, but
congratulations.
So 5 kids and 7 grandkids, but that ultimately ended the marriage. Probably that had something to do with it, because there was a lot of turmoil and moving. We moved back to, I won't even go into all the detail there, but moved back to Columbus, or back to Ohio, then back to Dallas again. And so it was just a lot of turmoil and and disruption. But
and it was a pressure cooker. Somehow in the midst of all of this, so you've got a young son and a wife who's obviously distraught about having to move and leave her family, but you, within 18 months, become the number one seller for all of Susquehanna, which is unreal. And you've got to be 24, 25 at this point?
Yeah, I was 84, so I was 24.
That's unbelievable.
It's funny because, like I said, I had no account list. And they gave me this account. I'll never forget this, called Sanger Harris. It was a Federated department store, kind of like Reich's and Lazarus and I guess Macy's now would be the only thing that would be a connector to that. They said, I said, I'm going to go call on this. And the guy, you'll never get them. Nobody's ever got them on the air. You'll never get them. I came back with an $18,000 order in 1 month on my first call. And that account became this huge client. And immediately I got recognition.
Amazing.
And that was a driver. And so I just built it from there. And the more confidence I got, I said, look, I'm really doing a good job for you all. I think I deserve some more accounts. And if you don't ask, you don't get. And they gave me some more accounts. And I just continued to grow and bring in new business. And ultimately was blessed to be able to hold every single monthly sales record that existed at the time.
Yeah, monthly. I've got every monthly and annual sales record that ever existed for Susquehanna, which is just...
At one time, I owned them all.
Absolutely amazing. What were you doing different? Two questions, two-part question. One, I would imagine at this point you're the youngest person on the team, and there's probably some veteran account executives there that I'm guessing may have felt threatened by you. And how did you manage that in terms of like the interpersonal relationships?
Well, I mean, when I got there, I was driving a Chevy Cavalier, and everybody else was driving Porsche, Mercedes-Benz. Our general sales manager drove a Lamborghini.
Oh my God!
You didn't know her name. Her name was Nancy Bates. You might know her name, but she was driving a Lamborghini.
That's amazing.
And I drove in a Chevy Cavalier. It was like, oh, he was this hasty. But I think it's because of my upbringing, my God-given talents, that I was able to kind of win them over time. They saw that, look, I just somebody who wants to make a living and want to do really well, just like them. And we all were very, very close. We had a very close sales staff, very competitive. We didn't suffer fools when it came to pushing it over the goal line.
Sure. Did you notice a difference in the pressure that was on you in Dallas versus Columbus? It was more dollars.
My desk, Chachi, and one day, and the sales manager, you know the name Dan Halliburton?
Yeah, I do.
He was our general manager then.
Okay.
Larry Grogan was the regional for Susquehanna at the time, but Nancy Bates walked up to me, and she was my direct report, and said, "What's the matter with you? You're not the guy I hired." And I was pressing, and it's the guy that loves the bird so much. Nice bird, lovely bird, kiss the bird, and then the next thing you know, you squeeze the bird to death.
Right.
I don't know what I was doing. I was pressing too hard. And she said, just relax, you're good. Just go do what you do. And that was like some of the best advice I had since I'd been there. And I think that's probably when the wire clicked for me, Chachi. And I said, just be who I am. I can't be somebody who I'm not. And I think all through my career, I was who I was and try to be authentic as I can, but also had sophistication to know when and when not to, but to be as transparent and as real as I possibly could. And
I think that's such a great assessment of yourself from me looking from the outside, in. I would classify you as that or call you exactly that. Like watching you give that speech a few weeks ago, you cried. You had tears on stage. And I don't know if I've seen another CEO of someone of your stature be that authentic, that real. And that meant a lot to me as someone in the audience to see you put yourself out there and to just share who you are as a human. I think it's incredibly inspirational.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. And it's all about our people. I mean, I care that much about our people. And if we have any HR issues, I'm the one who mediates it. Wow. And my wife says to me, are you kidding me? You're the CEO of Saga Communications. You're going to mediate an HR issue? And I'll say the same thing I've said to you. If we don't get that right, we don't get anything right. Nothing else happens. People are the most important thing we have. So we got to take care of them.
So true, man. So true. And I love that you live by that. You get all the success in Dallas and you get promoted to LSM. So now you've got a management position. And how old are you now at this point? 25, 26?
I was 25.
25. And you're an LSM in Dallas.
I was talking to our sales consultant at the time. You may remember this name, Norm Goldsmith.
Yeah, I do know that name.
God rest his soul. He was fantastic. And I said, I don't know if I should do this, Norm. What do you think? And he said, Chris, shut up and do it. You're 26-year-old, just like you just said. You're 26 years old and a sales manager in a top 6 market. What are you doing? Well, the problem was I was making so much money as a salesperson. I took a huge pay cut. And Dan Halliburton asked me one question. He said, do you get more joy out of others' success than you do your own? I said, I do. He said, that's why you should do this. And I did. I took a huge pay cut, huge, at the time.
But you saw it and you had the fortitude to take that pay cut, but also know, I'm assuming, would be a great learning experience for you.
I think because that was ingrained in me, and I think part of who I was, that I really wanted to coach and teach. Because if money didn't matter, that's what I would do. I would coach teams and be a teacher or a motivational speaker or something like that. Because I love giving back and pouring myself into others as others have done for me.
I have a friend, mentor, Rich Allen, who sold for CBS for many years, and then he became a sales manager for CBS. And for him, same situation. He was doing incredibly well as an account executive, and he had to take a step back in pay to become a manager. He had, not that he doesn't love leading and isn't a great mentor, he is, but he realized that he was best suited to become an account executive. So he basically fired himself, went back to being an account executive, and
Well, you know, when you can, go ahead.
Yeah. It worked out, but he had the reverse of that, which was really funny. But we all we call him Richie Rich. He's done very well for himself. He retired several years back, but he went and invested in real estate and owns apartment buildings and has done well. But so as a sales manager, you're still obviously very young, and you've got, I would imagine, a seasoned staff. And what was that like, having to manage? And now you're more than just a colleague; you're their supervisor. And that changes the dynamic.
That was very difficult because one of the other people on my staff, was one who was hired at the same time as a seller for KPLX in Dallas as I was. And she didn't get the job, and I did. And so and she was always very competitive with me anyway. She wanted to race me up the stairs and all that kind of stuff. And so that was somewhat difficult. But again, you find the path and you take the path, and hopefully over time you win them over. And that was really what my objective was because, I think the hardest job to do in broadcasting anyway is the sales manager's job, particularly today. And then to do it amongst your peers where they know where the bodies are buried and where the skeletons in the closet are and all that brings a whole nother element to the equation and makes it even more difficult. It was just like you described it. I had somebody that was constantly challenging me and testing me. And then the other part is, are they going to find out I don't know what I'm doing? That fear. Are they going to find me out that I'm a fraud?
Right. It's so funny. I have that even today, just, thinking about
me too.
What am I doing?
Yeah. Well, people definitely think you know what you're doing. No question about that.
Would you still reach out to your father at this point and go to him for advice? And did he help guide you?
Not really.
No.
I think God puts people in your life at the time when you need them. Mm-hmm. When the timing's just right. And he was there and still is. I mean, I referenced him in my remarks at the BFOA breakfast, and he was just here. He was here for about a week, and he and my mom were here together and with my sisters, and we had just had a wonderful time.
Oh, I love that. They're still around and doing well.
Well, they're 91 years old and been married 65 years. And
that's so fantastic.
He's just so proud, to see that I followed in his footsteps and have been able to realize the success that I have. And he's just so proud. And so I had to transition. I always ask people, do they have a mentor? And if they don't, and they say, I really don't have one, I said, you better go find one right now. You need one. And they don't choose you, you choose them. And so I had to choose different mentors along the way to take me to the next step. And one of those was Myra Jones. this is a guy that when I was at Radio 1, he would call, he had a long commute from Washington, D.C. back home to Virginia. And he would spend literally, Chachi, hours with me on the phone because my wife hadn't moved to Cleveland yet when I was running stations for Radio 1 in Cleveland. And we'd moved from Columbus, and I'd be there for, a week and then come home on weekends. And so I was there late every night, and he would call me on his way home and spend 2 hours just pouring himself into me. And he singularly had the biggest impact on my career of anyone.
That's fascinating. He must have seen something in you, but to take that time is incredibly giving.
Ed Christian was the same way with me.
To find those shepherds in your life like that. And you're right, you do have to seek them out. And if you can find them, there is no better education. Let's talk about getting recruited by Rodriguez Broadcasting to run KLTY, which was a contemporary Christian music station.
That was, as you know, it's the number one, maybe still is, number one CCM station in America. And even at that time, we had a 6 share. And then you do have a 6 share in Dallas, you can make a lot of money with it. But they had always been kind of backwards in their approach and really looked at themselves as being a super niche kind of format in a very small kind of sphere. And I was having a conversation with Mark, and we talked about the things that could be with that format, because if you think about it, it's really an adult contemporary, what would be considered an AC station.
Sure.
If you don't really listen to the words, that's exactly what it sounds like. It's it's an upbeat with great message, adult contemporary station. And my gosh, we had people like John Rivers on the air doing mornings, and we had KVIL personalities who had left KVIL and came from a spiritual place and decided they want to be a part of it, and they're doing afternoon drive. And you had great production guys that were Larry James, who was doing production. He had a production house in Dallas, and he did midday. So, all these great talent. So we were able to do some exciting things there. And that was the time when my marriage was kind of breaking up. And that's when we kind of said, let's try to go back to Columbus and try to put this together. And unfortunately, it didn't happen, but things happened for me.
It's been fascinating to see the CCM format grow, and I believe it's the second biggest, or maybe the biggest format now in the country. I think it's country music and CCM maybe neck and neck. We launched a CCM library a few years ago, and I think the way that you described it is spot on. The only difference is the passion for the listener in the CCM format it's like a country station passion or a rock station passion, but an AC type sound. It's really a fun format. It has the
passion level of a classical music station.
Yes.
Or something like that. The time spent listening is enormous.
Through the roof.
Immune to it. So, you're absolutely right.
So you decide to move back to Columbus now to join Nationwide, and you're struggling to try to, I guess, keep your marriage together, and certainly going through a lot of stress at this time. Was it nice, comforting to at least be back in Ohio and close to home?
It really was. It really was. I think it helped to be back there amongst a little closer to family, because being in Dallas, you're a long way away from Ohio, and being there near family, having that support system, but also being back, and also provided some clarity that we didn't belong together, and that was clear.
That's tough to go through, especially when kids. I've been through it twice, and I'm very fortunate to it's been civil, and we still have a really great relationship with both my exes, but it's still very difficult, and certainly when you've got your kids and trying to manage all of that and make sure that you're giving them the childhood they deserve. I could only imagine trying to manage your career. Well,
and the other part, Chachi, little known fact is I married her twice.
Really?
Because my parents had never been divorced. I'd never been around divorce ever. And I always thought it had to be mom and dad and the kids. So even against my better judgment, knowing that it wasn't going to work, I said, we need to try this. So we did try it again. And we're only married for a couple of years and then divorced. And then that's when I was a single dad for about 10 years and stayed in Columbus, make sure my kids got through school.
I really respect the commitment of not giving up and going through that twice. It really says a lot about you and the sacrifices you made for your family. And even though it didn't work out, that's impressive.
Well, I did get it right on the third try.
Well, good.
I've been married to my wife for 23 years, and She is my life partner in every aspect of the definition of life partner.
Congratulations. There's hope for me yet. Third time is a charm.
They're out there. I promise you. He's out there.
Tell me a little bit about working for Nationwide.
That is, like we've kind of touched on, I've been very fortunate to work for, singling out three incredible companies: Susquehanna, Nationwide, and now Saga. They're all very similar. The reason they're so good, that were so good for me, that I learned this much later, is that they really fit my why. I mean, they fit like a glove in terms of people first, and investing in the product, and investing in the community, being local, investing in their advertisers, doing good work, wowing their customers. All of those elements that were important, I think, to be successful. All of them had it. All of them.
And set you up for the foundation of your current role to be able to work. Right. Yeah. And then things obviously started to change with consolidation, and a lot of those ownership groups, unfortunately sold and became parts of companies we all know. Yeah, different companies today, and I'm excited to get into Saga, because that's one of the groups that is remained on its own, which is a whole other story. And I'm excited to dive into that. But it is interesting how much you learned along the way at Susquehanna and Nationwide, and the various mentors that you helped. And
I would also tell you that, Wilkes Broadcasting, you're familiar, you mentioned Wilkes Broadcasting.
Yeah.
That was also, I call that finishing school, because Jeff Wilkes is someone who knows how to get the most out of someone and then some. As the poem says, to push you to the point where you don't think you can go any further and you got a little bit left. That's where I learned that.
And you referenced that at the Broadcasters Foundation breakfast when you said reach a little higher.
That's right. That's right. When you don't think you can, reach just a little higher. And that's where I learned that. And I don't think I could do the job that I do today without what I learned from Jeff, because I call that finishing school.
And I want to get more into Jeff, because Jeff had a network too, didn't he? Wilkes Broadcasting, did they have a network?
Well, yeah, he had a good-sized company.
Yeah. I remember. I never got to meet Jeff, but I remember hearing about him throughout the years. Let's talk a little bit about getting promoted to DOS at COL. So you get CEO comes to you and basically wants you to become the DOS. And you've been at this point LSM and national sales manager, but this is the first time now you're in charge of all of sales. So it's a pretty big role. And how did that differ? And from A, just in terms of your responsibilities, but B, the actual pressure of the job?
Well, it's very exciting, because we Nationwide acquired the station, was owned by Great Trails, and they acquired the station and flipped it from oldies to, it used to be known as WGTZ, Z93 or Z93, I think it was. And then they flipped it. It was oldies, and then they flipped it to country at a time when, this is in the mid 90s. So country was huge.
Sure.
And
Garth Brooks
Rita and all those guys, and Garth and everybody. And the competitor was an outlier in about 45 minutes outside of Columbus with a big stick, about 50 kW signal out of Lancaster, Ohio. Didn't have much of a signal into Columbus. So the path was laid out pretty nicely for us, because the whole moniker was Continuous Country Favorites without the static. And so it really put the competitor into an empty parking lot at that point. And we really had great success. We created a whole pillar sponsorships, like the first advertiser to be on the air with COL as a country station, and then presented them with a plaque that had a copy of the invoice on it, and they hung it in their office. And so we had a lot of fun with it, and had great talent.
I love that energy when you've just flipped a station. It's a new format. So exciting. So exciting.
It was a lot of fun, very rewarding, and learned an awful lot in being in that position, because being a WNCI sister station, we had WNCI and WCOL were the two FMs of the market under Nationwide at the time. So we had a really big cluster. They were operated separately, completely separately, but we had a lot of strength in the market.
It sounds too that you've always had a knack for showmanship. which I appreciate. I love the idea of presenting a plaque for the first advertiser and going out and doing these events. And I love the way that you present yourself, the way that you dress. I think that's incredibly cool and something that makes you stand out.
Well, I'll just say this. There's rarely anything that I do or say that doesn't have a purpose to it. It is the brand, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
But it's not a brand. It's really me. I mean, I've just branded it, but it's really me. The brand is me.
You've created a terrific brand, but it is genuinely you. It's a great way of explaining it. Ed Christensen approaches you to leave Nationwide, and I'm assuming you're having a great time at this point. You just launched the new country station, having success there, and invites you to join Saga, which you decided to do as the DOS for Sunny 95 FM. And then at that point, he had acquired 2 other stations. And so tell me about that and moving from Nationwide to work for Ed, and then we'll get into the rest of the story, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, Ed would call and also Al Fetch, who's also all these people that are no longer with us any longer. Great people. He and Ed would both call and say, "You ready to go? You ready to move? You ready to move?" I go, "No, I'm really happy here." And timing is everything, Chachi.
Sure.
So I finally said, okay, all right, I'll do it. So I leave Nationwide, go to Saga. Shortly thereafter, Nationwide separated and everything was sold off. I mean, shortly thereafter.
So your timing really is everything.
Timing was perfect. Think of where I might have been then. If okay, and whatever. But the Saga or Nationwide was no more after that. Shortly thereafter that, like within a year.
Did they sell to one group, or did they sell the stations kind of individually?
They sold it, most of it to J-Core.
Okay.
And which became Clear Channel and iHeart. But they sold most of it. There were some pieces of it because, Nationwide was in some great markets, big markets, Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, all over the place. So really great markets. And some of them were sold off to individuals, smaller companies, but the bigger part of it was sold off to J-Core. And I remember Al Fetch literally standing up on his desk, yelling into the phone at Ed Christian, trying to get him to buy some of the stations that Nationwide was trying to sell. And Ed was like, "No, that's not Saga." And Ed was so disciplined because it would have been so easy to go buy a San Diego or a Dallas or something. And Ed said, "No, that's not us." And I really I learned so much from that was this is who we are and this is how we roll and this is how it's going to be.
I want to peel back on that onion or peel the layers of that onion, I think is the expression about how Ed and you purchased stations. But when I read about it, it sounded so much to me like the way what was the guy that owned Trader Joe's? He was so methodical about where he opened up each Trader Joe's. He wanted to make sure that the people in that area had a certain education, that they were X amount of distance away from a college. And I mean, he did all this research and I found that very fascinating. And I learned Ed and him had a lot of similarities. So I do want to dig into that.
Ed was, like I said, a disciplined buyer and a disciplined seller. He would look and lay in the weeds for properties. There were several things that he identified, and one was to be in a college town where a state university or a college is located. Also, capital cities was also an area that he coveted. Non-closable military bases was another one. High ag activity. And finally, and most recently, high net worth retirement communities. I saw in the tech report recently that the average age of radio listeners is 58 now. That was one of the reasons that we started looking into places like Ocala, where the villages are in that area, and Leesburg. And we bought and acquired stations in Ocala, Florida. That had a lot to do with that. And then you had in Gainesville, Ocala, you had University of Florida right there. And
really smart. That's really smart.
Yeah, he was a great buyer.
And especially at that time, and we now obviously can look through our, have everyone's got 2020 rear view vision, whatever they say, but so many of those companies went on to fail very sadly, but they overpaid for these assets and they were kind of buying up, I guess, haphazardly, and then getting themselves over levered and so forth. And really very fascinating, the discipline and that model. And how did he come up with that model? Was that just something?
That's a really good question. Ed was a brilliant man. Maybe the smartest man I've ever met. I was amazed at where he could come to a decision. I'd go, wow, where did you get there? How did that come? And then sometimes he would explain it to me. And I'd say, that makes lots of sense. And he had the ability to think almost in milliseconds And so I don't know the answer to your question about how he got to that. That's where he landed, and it really served and has served Saga well.
And Trader Joe's always avoided the temptation to go into like a big format, like a gigantic supermarket. They've always had a relatively small footprint, and they're incredibly methodical as well about how they open. And they've had a tremendous amount of success. It's fascinating.
Well, it took me forever to try to get Ed to buy QFM 96, because when I worked for Jeff Wilkes in Columbus, he owned QFM 96, and when I went to Saga, I kept whispering in Ed's ear, that's the station we should get next. The classic rock to put with Sunny 95, the female-based station. And I kept asking him. And he was laying in the weeds, and too much. And finally, we were at a manager's meeting in Florida, and he slid me a piece of paper, and it was a prospectus on QFM 96. And I said, is there any real significance to this? And he goes, no. And about a month later, he bought the station.
Amazing.
Yeah. He and I like to play little fun, jokey games all the time.
I'm sure.
People look at us and just shake their heads.
I'm sure him passing away had to have been a big loss for you. And
it was very hard. Extreme. It still is. I think about him all the time.
I only got to meet him one time, but obviously his reputation in the business is just absolutely sterling. And he was
it's wonderful. And he's got I'm very close with his widow, Judy, and very close. Ed and his son Eric is like a brother. You got to see him probably at the.
I did. Yeah, he was at NAB, and I've gotten to meet him a few times, and he was very touched by your. I saw him actually right after your speech at the reception after the breakfast, and he was very touched by your speech. And he's your head of marketing, correct?
He's our CMO, yeah.
CMO, yeah, really bright guy.
Yeah.
So we'll go back to where this started with Ed. He did persuade you, perfect timing, to leave Nationwide. You become the DOS. So this is your first time. How did you first meet Ed, and how did you get to know him well enough that he decided, hey, he needed to hire you?
Ed didn't like people that were, I hope I can say this. Ed didn't like people that were kicking his ass.
But I respect he was smart enough to hire that person.
and we were. And why don't you come to work for me? I got to know Al Fetch because Al and I were on some boards together in Columbus, and he and I got to know each other, and he introduced me to Ed, and I'd communicate with Ed and with Al Fetch also. And one day he just said, well, come on, if you can't beat him, join him.
I love it. He gave you an offer you couldn't refuse. And so he made you DOS, and then acquired a couple other stations that you were the DOS for, NND and WVMX. And then after a few years, you were ready at this point to get your GM stripes. You've been LSM, a national sales manager, local sales manager, director of sales, and now you're anxious to become a GM. But Ed basically didn't have anything for you at the time. So he essentially said, hey, go get your stripes and then come back and we'll figure something out. So you did, and you picked up and you moved to yet another really solid company to go work for Kathy Hughes' company, Radio One, in Cleveland.
I did. And actually, Ed's exact words were, go get your combat pay and then come back, and you can come back to us. That was his exact words.
Which is really shrewd of him, too, because go get trained by somebody else.
Exactly.
It's like the airlines. They hire military pilots because they've already gotten their training.
And what a training it was. Yeah. That's where I met Zamira Jones.
Oh, okay.
He was the guy who recruited me to the company.
And what was Zamira doing at that time?
He was their COO.
COO. And was Kathy the CEO?
No, Alfred was.
Alfred already was. Okay, gotcha.
CEO, and Zamira was the COO. And he was there for, unfortunately for me, about a year and a half. And then Barry Mayo replaced him.
I see.
In that meantime, I stole a lot of his time. And he gave it freely, frankly. And that was a game changer for me. I can't say that enough. That was the game changer.
That's incredible that he was given that kind of time to you on pretty much a daily basis. And you guys he would just call every night, and the two of you would riff. You would share challenges and different issues you were going through, and he would share advice and give you leadership skills.
You know what I loved most about what he would do is he would ask me a question, and he would never let me off the hook. He'd never answer the question for me until I got it. Come on, keep working. Well, what about this? Keep coming.
It's almost like he was a therapist to some degree.
Yeah, definitely was. The interpersonal currency that he gave me, I can never repay him.
At that time, they had several stations, and so I could only imagine how many GMs he had reporting up to him. And so there's no way he could have spent that kind of time with all of you. What do you think he saw in you?
I asked him that, and I thank him all the time because, as I said, gratitude, respect, enthusiasm, accountability, and teamwork. You have to practice what you preach. And I'm very grateful to him, and I constantly tell him that because we still talk all the time. And I asked him, why? Why me? He said, I saw something in you. I can't take the credit for it because all I did is pour it in. And then you took it from there.
Oh, he was right. He was right.
I always knew you were going to do something big.
He was right. What was, Cleveland's a big market. You're a GM now for the first time. You obviously have the sales chops and number one seller for Susquehanna and just did incredibly well throughout all of your stops. But now as a GM, you're not only overseeing sales, but now you've got programming and you've got a lot of other responsibilities in your purview. How did that change from a day to day? And it's kind of a two-part question. I really respect this. I came from the programming side, and you obviously came from the sales side, but you've got this whole entertainment side of you. Your family, while your dad was an AE, he was a singer, and your mom was a singer, and your sister, all very talented, it sounds like. And so I would imagine you I won't say gravitate, but at least can relate to the performers, the on-air talent, and so forth.
I gravitate to the performance. This may sound terrible, but I love to perform because it's authentic. There's no acting in it, ever. People say, I don't know how to read you sometimes. Just ask me, I'll tell you. Because I have no hidden agendas. If I have a problem with you, you'll know it.
I think that's beautiful, man. I think that's art, putting yourself out there. And why I believe a lot of our artistic people are incredibly sensitive is because they're putting themselves out on the line and sharing their whatever, their painting or their comedy skills or their singing skills, whatever it may be. But that takes a tremendous amount of courage. And a lot of people are afraid to step onto the stage.
Well, I learned something from Zamira. He said to me one time, you don't have to be on all the time. Just when it's time.
Just when it's time? That's a great line.
And so I'm not smart enough, Chachi, to remember long things. So I kind of learn and live in sound bites. I have sayings and slogans and things like that help me remember and move culture forward. It's easy to remember for others too.
You have tremendous sound bites. I would say they're almost like little meditations, or not even little. I mean, they're meditations to help you get through, your day to day. I can only imagine everything is coming at you, and we will get there in a minute. And I want to set that table. Yeah, but sure. Did you pretty quickly resonate then and could get dealing with the talent? And when you're dealing with talent, there's a whole other set of challenges that come with that, and it's a different management skill in a lot of ways, and how you can communicate and manage an AE versus how you can communicate and manage talent or a program director.
That's a very interesting point, because my tact on that was I didn't treat them differently. They're people, and they have the same needs and the same interests and the same desires as other people do. You just have to find what that is. And once you get there, you can't ever motivate anybody. You can only really provide the stimulus to motivate somebody, but you and I can't motivate somebody to do something. But I can provide the stimulus to get them to do that because I find what their why is. And that's where I go with it. But that requires time and attention and interest. And that's why it's the most important thing that we do.
And goes back to what you had said earlier in the podcast, really listening. You enjoy listening to people and learning about people.
Yeah. I love to listen and love to learn. I'm a deep, deep listener.
Would you like to get involved as a GM? Would you get into programming discussions and music and research and promotions? Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. People would say, well, you're a sales guy. No, I'm a business guy. Yeah. And it happens to be show business. Yeah. And that's cool.
When we both started, there was almost this wall down the middle of the building that was, at least for me, programming and sales, and we didn't really collaborate as well as we should have. And now I think that's changed a lot, and a lot of the successful stations you see today are this perfect culmination of sales and marketing and programming and everyone, coming together. But I think it was more difficult in our era when we were coming up.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I talked about being deliberate and purposeful in all you do, and every time I was a GM in every building I was in, I put the program director's office right in the middle of the building. Right on the line, if you will.
That's really smart. So they were exposed to both sides.
Yeah.
Really smart. Yeah. Because you would have PDs that were incredibly protective of the brand, and understandably so, but it would be so much so that they wouldn't touch certain things because it was going to mess up the sound of the station. And we took a lot of that incredibly seriously. I don't know if we look back at it and go, maybe that was we were a little too serious about stuff, but we certainly did in that era.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll tell you a quick story.
Please.
When I was a DOS, I went to Sunny, and our program director was a guy by name, you may know him, Chuck Knight.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Chuck Knight, was he in San Diego at one point?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
And San Antonio, I think.
Yeah.
Great guy. He and I were very close. He came to my wedding and all that. Well, he and I were in a discussion in a promotion meeting, and he was shaking his finger at me from across the desk. And I said, if you don't stop shaking that finger at me, I'm going to bite it off and shove it up your ass. Yeah. So, yes, we're all very protected. And then I heard a voice from the other side of the room that said, my money's on Forgy.
That is awesome. Oh my God. The intensity and the drama. I do miss those days though to some degree, you know.
Right? There's plenty of drama and intensity even today too, right?
So you spend 5 years in Cleveland working for Radio 1 as a GM. You really are getting your combat pay. And then Jeff Wilkes asked you to go back to Columbus and run LVQ, which you did and worked there for a year. Tell me a little bit about that move.
It was time for me to go in Cleveland. There's always that kind of that sell by date. It's like time to go. And so Jeff and I knew each other, and he knew I'd been in Columbus, and he had an opening and asked me to come back. And like I said, that was finishing school for me, because I literally remember laying in my bed in a fetal position going, can I do this? It was tough. He was very demanding. There was never any time off. It was 10 o'clock, midnight, weekends, whenever. You're going to get a call from Jeff and you're going to talk to him for an hour, whenever it is. And it was like that all the time. And it got hot. It got difficult. But I learned a ton, Chachi, there. And like I said, I was an athlete, so I knew how to push my body past what I thought I could do. I didn't know how to push my mind like this. Mm-hmm. And he taught me how to do that. And I still carry that with me today, because I won't ever say or ask someone to do or say something that I haven't done or would do.
Really interesting. So he was just a true owner, operator, fascinated by every part of the business, but also held his team incredibly accountable for better or worse, it sounds like.
Yeah. It was a very good experience and a very tough experience.
Yeah. But sometimes you need that. You need that kind of training to see how far you can physically go. I think this day and age, it's probably a different world to some degree when you and I were a little bit younger, in terms of the school of hard knocks, but
what you can get away with.
Yeah.
Right?
Big time. So Ed calls you now for the second time and reaches out, because now you've done your combat pay. And he asks you to come back and run SNY, NND, and VMX. And back to the story that you told a little bit ago, you also acquire LVQ, which you helped kind of transact. You got him at least interested in that radio station.
And when I was at Wilkes, QFM by itself was the number one billing station in Columbus. We took it from about 9 million to 11.6 million in 1 year, 18 months. And we unseated Sunny 95 as the number one billing station in Miller Kaplan in Columbus. So Ed said for the second time, you're kicking our ass. Why don't you come over? And they already had a general manager at the time. And he said, I said, well, you already have a general manager. He said, I'll take care of that. And next thing I know, Warren Lotta who at the time was the COO, and Ed's number 2, called me and he said, okay, you ready? And the problem was I had a 6-month non-compete with Jeff Wilkes. And he was going to hold me to it. And so I couldn't go into the building at Sunny for 6 months. So here's how smart Ed was. So what did he, I didn't know that he was grooming me to do this or to be his number 2 until much later. But he thought so far in advance. Here's what he did. He put me on the road for 6 months, and I went to every single Saga market and did training and coaching in every single of our Saga markets, learned the people, got to know them, did training, taught them culture, a lot of the things we talked about today. I did that for 6 months. That was the starting point to what we're doing now.
Now, exceptional education, not fully knowing why you're doing it, making all those market visits, but it gave you a great understanding of the company as a whole.
Yeah.
And a great way to utilize you while you had a non-compete.
Yeah.
Inspiring leader, Ed certainly was, and just so incredibly wise. So you're back in Columbus now for 9 years. You're running the stations there for Ed, and he calls you and says, hey, come and fly to my house.
He calls me and he says, what are you doing next Thursday? And I said, well, I've got this event and that again. He goes, clear your schedule. I go, my first thing I said was, am I in trouble? I have a tendency, ask for forgiveness versus permission. Yeah. And I thought, I started thinking back, did I do anything I'm in trouble for? So I asked him a question. He goes, no, we're going to have some dancing lessons. What's your shoe size? This is how Ed would play. Try to keep you off balance.
Right.
And I said, well, my shoe size is a size 9. Why? He goes, meet me at the FBO, the local airport, private airport. The jet's going to pick you up and bring you to Sarasota to my house. Okay. So my wife drops me off. I still have the picture of me getting on the jet when I was going to meet Ed. He picks me up at the FBO in Sarasota and drives me around all of these places in Sarasota that I've been to 100 times. This is that. I said, Ed, I've seen this. You've shown me this before. And he pulls up to Fred Astaire Dance Studio, and they're closed. I go, there's no dance lessons here. We're closed. They're closed. He goes, get out of the car. And I go, what? He goes, get out of the car. And so I get out of the car, and he gets his camera out, and he takes a picture of me, which I still have, in front of the dance studio. And he said, now raise your leg up and act like you're doing a little dance move. Okay. So we did this kind of stuff all the time. And so I did that, took a picture of that. He drives me over to the Sarasota Yacht Club. We sit down, have a glass of wine, and he says, Warren Lotta's retiring, and I want you to take his place. And my mouth hit the ground. I was like, what? Holy cow. Now you're in the big time.
Unbelievable.
I didn't think about it for a month. I said, I don't even think, what do you want me to think? I mean, to think about. No, that was it. I want you to consider it. I want you to talk to your bride. My wife knew something was up all along, obviously.
That is like something full out of a scene from a movie. That is really absolutely wild. I love how playful he was. And yeah, just a total prankster. That's hilarious.
I had that relationship. We had that playful relationship.
So now, I mean, you're going from certainly you were responsible for a lot of money running the cluster, but now, I mean, over 100 radio stations, the COO, I mean, that is a tremendous amount of responsibility. And what was that change like in terms of, did Warren stay and help you with the transition, or was that something you had to?
Warren was there for about 6 weeks.
Okay.
Before he left, and then he retired. And we had a vice president of human resources. Her name is Marcia Lebedo. She's still on our board. She's since retired, but she too was a great mentor. Once I got to the building, she gave me the lay of the land, and because I had lots of questions, and because it's as anything, it's a dysfunctional family, and you can see it in the markets. Even though we did great work and great in the community, everything was like any family, had a little dysfunction, and I wanted to know all about it, and it was time for me to learn and know all about it. Yeah. And everything. And she really helped me there. And Warren certainly was a big help in the transition. That was the second time in my career when I thought to myself, are they going to find out that I'm a phony?
Yeah.
It was like, Warren. Because you know what? these guys all knew me too. I want to tell you something in a minute, but I don't want to forget because it's really important. Because they knew me, all the managers knew me. I was their contemporary. And they knew me as a fun kind of, hey, let's have some fun first, then we'll get to business later. How's that? And, I sang we had a band called Saga Turner Overdrive. And it was Chachi, this band was fantastic. And it was all the members of Saga employees. We had 2 keyboard players and it was unbelievable. And we would rehearse like the day before the managers meeting. And
that's so cool.
We'd have staging and lights and sound and the whole bit. It was very good.
Oh my God, that's great.
They knew me that way. Kind of a fun guy. But what I wanted to tell you was I went away to Radio 1 and Marcia knew me that way, Marcia Lebedo, which is why I brought her name up, our vice president of human resources. And I came back, and when she met me to talk to me about coming back to the corporate office, she looked at me and she said, "You are a completely different person than I knew when you left the company the first time." And I said, "Thank you," because that too was deliberate. I had to change. Fundamentally.
Andrew, what changes did you make?
I didn't have to be on all the time. As Zamira said, only when it's time. And I think my demeanor from working with Zamira, it really gave me some interpersonal skills that I didn't have in terms of changing pace and stopping and listening and learning and trying to determine where they wanted to be and meet them there and slow the process down.
That's really insightful. And did you happen to see the Robbie Williams movie that came out a few months ago? And he had that, like he was always had to be performing on stage. And it probably goes back a lot to your artistic roots and your family all being performers. So you felt like it just was relentless. And that takes a tremendous amount of energy too, to constantly.
It was always, hey, look at me.
Yeah.
And now it was, hey, look at you.
And you had Myra and mentors around the way that gave you that feedback. Probably wasn't easy to do, but you also received it, I'm guessing, well, and didn't get defensive about it.
It's like, how far are you willing to go to get what you don't have? And I was willing to go real far and work really hard to get there because it didn't come naturally. A lot of things I did came naturally.
Sure. You hear about the tech companies, and they have these business coaches, essentially executive coaches. And I'm reading this book right now, The $1 Trillion Coach, who was about this coach who worked with Tim Cook and the guys from Google and all these big Silicon Valley people. And he was actually, I can't remember his name right now, but he was a football coach, and he came at approached them as a football coach would do. And it was a lot of just, advice that he used with his players, but it really worked with that corporate environment as well here at the highest level, at the top of Google. And
that was really cool because Sam Bush, our CFO, has referred to me as part preacher, part counselor, part coach, part motivational speaker. So I guess I'm a little bit of all that stuff.
Yeah. That's a great description. So you've got this role. Warren retires. The other general managers know you. Were any of them, I don't want you to point out names or anything like that because I know you still work with them, but were there any sort of jealousy, or were most people pretty supportive of that?
I don't recall any jealousy per se.
Okay.
I think there might have been a little disappointment.
Sure.
That they didn't get that job. There's maybe one or two of those. Yeah, so I think it was very limited. I think they were very supportive. They knew I came from a good place, but I think they were waiting to see how I was, number one, going to work with Ed, because he's very difficult to work for. So, but I always found a way to get to his playful side, because that was where he and I had a relationship that nobody else had with him. And like my first day of work, one day, for example, it was his birthday and I was in Columbus, and I sent him a singing, dancing chicken to his office in North Point. A guy dressed up as a chicken and singing happy birthday to him. And all these stories are coming up. And the turkey or the chicken walked in. He looked down at his desk, never looked up, and acknowledged that the chicken was there. Until the chicken left. The very next day, what showed up at my office in Columbus? A dancing, singing chicken. So we had that playful relationship.
Yeah, that's great.
And, on my first day at work in Saga, when I was replacing Warren, I dressed in a sailor's outfit. I had a sailor's cap. I had suspenders, shorts, a white shirt, a bow tie. I was coming to school, my school uniform. And he looked at me and he goes, "What is that?" I go, "My first day of school." He goes, "Go change your clothes." It was like that. And we always had that playful relationship.
I only got to meet him once, but I likened him to some degree to Sam Walton in that he's a visionary, a very shrewd negotiator. I never negotiated with him directly, but always through kind of an intermediary, if you will. And I respected it. I always knew that was going to happen, that he was going to grind. But it always went back to Sam Walton would always negotiate the very best deal he possibly could, because he said his customer deserves the very best deal they possibly can. And the vendor knows how low they can afford to go. And if the vendor can't go that low, then that's fine. Then, but that's just essentially the negotiation. And I always respected that about him, coming from the other side, because he was just very, upfront about it. And so you knew, but I think that's also why the company was so financially disciplined. And if you look at how it was run, and it's not only survived, but flourished through so many different challenges when we saw so many companies go through bankruptcy. And you've got to hand it to both of you and the whole entire team there for being disciplined in how you spent money, disciplined how you bought stations, just really local focused. I mean, you guys made a lot of wise choices and didn't give in, I'm assuming, to some temptation, because you could have gotten crazy funding at that, a lot of points and got yourselves over levered. So it takes a lot of discipline and fortitude. And I think he was a visionary in a lot of ways because of that.
Yeah, and those are the things that we continue to try to carry on in his memory. Those are things that he was very good at, and in fact, better than anyone at. Yeah. And as a result, we've been able to be, I think, one or maybe the only broadcast company with cash on hand and basically no debt.
It's incredible. And by the way, I don't knock, like if I were John or Lou or David Field I probably would have given into those temptations too. You know what I mean?
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't knock them at all. It's just, it is fascinating though how Ed really did do just a remarkable job, and yourself and everybody of keeping the Saga ship, sailing smoothly. Ed, in very sadly, because he obviously was a mentor to you and your boss, and you guys had this relation, almost like a big brother, little brother relationship, passes away. You've been now in the role for 5 years. I mean, I'm guessing that's like pretty much losing a family member, maybe even more, because you guys spent so much time together. What was that?
I mean, there are some stories I just can't tell you because we were all sworn to secrecy, but there are things that brought us very close together. Most of them had some kind of a fun element to them or funny element to them. Some of them were dangerous, but nevertheless, we were very close. And I've said to Eric, his son, many times, who's like a brother to me, literally, that Ed was like a second father. He was my best friend, one of my best friends. He was a mentor. So it was a very complicated relationship. There were so many layers to it. And so when you lose somebody like that, it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
You know? And I was there just before he passed at his bedside, and it was time for me to go. And family called a couple of days later and said he passed. And it was like a I don't know, board in the face or something.
Yeah. It's I lost my mom a little over a year ago, and you never you never get over it. You just learn to live with it.
Yeah.
But you had, not only the loss of someone you're incredibly close with, but also the responsibility now of running this business, which is a tremendous responsibility. And in so many ways is Ed. And, it was his, outside of his family and his kids, was his child, and and he, poured his heart and soul into it. And so you not only were dealing with the grieving, but you get appointed now as the only second president CEO of the company since it's been founded. And so what was that like? And in a lot of ways, I'm sure it's bittersweet. It's a beautiful thing to get that role and that title, and very well deserved, but also you've lost someone incredibly close to you. Well,
and like I've said and alluded to in the past in the conversation with you, is I was always looking forward, because I always here's how I think. What would I do? How would I do that? I would see something Ed would do, and I would always reflect and ask him, what caused you to get to that decision? And he would explain it to me. And then we would discuss what I might do differently. And he would always chastise me as to why that would be a terrible idea, and we joke about it. But having the opportunity to work with him for so long and have that relationship, well, real quick, he had 3 guys that he ran with, a guy by the name of Dave Stone, Al Lucarelli, and Ed Christian. All of them have passed. And I remember being at Ed's funeral, and Al Lucarelli pulled me aside because it was pretty much, it hadn't been announced, but it was a foregone conclusion what was going to happen next. And he said, when you get into that chair, whatever you decide to do it fast. I said, Al, I'm glad you said that, because I already have a plan. I know where I'm going. I've already thought it through, because people would say to me, are you nervous and stressful? I said, no, I feel pretty deep in the saddle. Number one, I've kind of Ed's allowed me to do a lot of this. Like I said earlier, he was kind of preparing me to do this job. So I was more ready than maybe I could or should have been because of that. And I also had my ideas of the disruption I needed to cause in order for us to grow and to go into the next phase of the saga. Because, saga, its translation in Icelandic is an ongoing adventure.
I did not know that.
That's the translation of saga. So that was also by design. That was, Ed comes from Icelandic heritage. And so it was our next adventure. And in order for us to go there, we had to disrupt, and we certainly did, much to the dismay of some. And, we've worked through that, and we continue to grow.
I think it's incredibly, and probably not surprising, learning more about Ed through you, how he probably planned for this more than you could have ever imagined, much like when he flew you out to go see him and took you in front of the Fred Astaire dance studio and all the shenanigans, but he knew that he was going to put you in that role. And I'm sure he was aware, and his health was failing and so forth, that he was probably planning for something that you may not even have realized at the time. And you got to hand it to him for having that vision again. You have a program director that works for you named Morgan Prue, and she is in your Manchester media group at WZID and Rewind 94.1, and Saga, and again, full disclosure, uses our libraries. And so she had reached out to us about asking if she could switch one of the libraries. And I said, Morgan, it's so good to hear from you. I'm really happy things are going well. I'm actually interviewing Chris Forgy next week on my podcast. And then I congratulated her about a VO talent and so forth. And she said, totally great. What timing, right? I haven't met him yet, but everyone loves him, smiley face. And first of all, to give you a little bit of background about Morgan, Morgan is actually the protege to Jim Ryan, the very famous Jim Ryan at LTW and at WCBS, most recently in NEW. He just recently stepped down, but she worked with Jim for many, many years, and one of the brightest programmers I know, and just a wonderful, wonderful personality. But it goes to show you the vibe that you have within Saga. And you could say, hey, I ate it a little bit because I told her I was going to be interviewing you, but to say how much that she loves it there was obviously, her own words. And I don't hear that as much as I'd like from other groups or from talent working in other groups, and I wanted to share that with you because I thought it was really neat to see people that are out there working for Saga and really enjoy it.
Well, and that is the thing, Chachi, that puts wind in my sails. That's my motivator. That's my why. And it started out with, when Jeff Schmidt from the RAB is a dear friend, and he actually helped me with this. And I said to him, my why is I want people to come back to me at some point in their career or their life and tell me that I've made a difference in their life, personally or professionally. And he said, well, let's put that together. And so we did. And we ended up with what I read at the BFOA breakfast, which is what my why is. And so when I hear those kinds of things, it just puts wind in my sails. It puts a hand in my back and keeps me pushing, because that's the nudge that gets me up every day and gets me to go to work, because it goes back to, you've seen The Wizard of Oz probably 100,000 times, right? Well, when the Tin Man gets his heart, he says, heart's a hard thing to have because it's so easy to be broken, right? And the Tin Man says, I still want one. And Oz says to him, he says, a heart is not measured by how much you are loved or how much you love, but how much you are loved by others.
I love
and that you only get that by giving.
Yeah.
The only way you get that.
So true. So true. And we all want to win and we all want our companies to be successful, but the gratification that you get from your team members succeeding and going back to your why, it does feel better than, even the bonus you may earn or whatever it may be. And I love that about your guys' just overall culture. Tell me a little bit, we hit about this at the beginning and you brought it up in your speech, just two things I want you to revisit, if you wouldn't mind, is one, let's talk about GREAT again and what that stands for and how that's part of the Saga culture. It's another way for me to help me remember, frankly, as I said, because I'm not that smart to remember the long mission statements and things like that. Nobody else is, for that matter, but I'm not a big fan of mission statements. But this is the mission statement, and it's about your interaction with people and how you respond to stimulus and so forth. So it starts with, it's the word GREAT, and it stands for gratitude, respect, be grateful for what you have, respect what you do, enthusiasm, go at it with gusto and fun, have fun with it, accountability. We all have to be accountable for our actions, what we do and don't do, and what we say and don't say. Because as leaders, we are constantly being observed by others, and we have to be, as that's why we call them leaders. Leadership or leader is not a title; it's an action. And finally, in order to get anything done, there has to be a sense of team. You talked about it earlier when, what can galvanize a group of people more than love for what they do and love for one another and who they report to and who they work for. You can get a group of people going like that. Now you got a North Compass. And that's why what we do with our people is so critical, because nothing else happens without it. I think that's phenomenal, and something, not only am I grateful that you share that within Saga, but I think the whole entire industry and the fact that you share that with the industry, it's valuable for all of us. And another, what I thought was the most moving part about your speech, and there was so many things that were really just amazing about it and heartfelt about it, but the "And Then Some" poem. And do you happen to have that in front of you? If not, we can pause here.
I do.
Would you mind sharing that? I was so incredibly moved by it that I shared this with the Benztown team, and I really just thought it summed up you and summed up your adventure and your certainly your journey, your saga, as you would say. But it again is another really valuable lesson for us as an industry as we're going through these tumultuous times. And
one of your partners called me to tell me that somebody from your team called them to tell them that you used this poem in an email to you.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Talk about putting wind in my sails. That was excellent. I love that.
That's awesome. I love to hear that.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. That's so cool. I had no idea.
Yeah, so it traveled the gamut
through the radio universe and back again.
So yeah, it comes from a book that is out. It's a very short read, and it's called 212 Degrees. And basically, the concept is that water is hot at 211 degrees, and at 212 degrees, just 1 degree more, it boils, and it's creating steam that's powerful enough to power a locomotive. So it's the 1 degree difference that makes the big difference, is the whole thought. And in that is a poem written by Carl Holmes, and it's called "And Then Some." And it really is part of our culture. our people know, and they use it frequently, and then some. You'll hear them say it, and everybody knows what they mean.
I love it.
And because this is all part of the culture that we install. And it says, and then some. These three little words are the secret to success. They are the difference between average people and the top people in most companies. The top people always do what is expected, and then some. They are thoughtful of others. They are considerate and kind, and then some. They meet their responsibilities fairly and squarely, and then some. They are good friends and helpful neighbors, and then some. They can be counted on in an emergency, and then some. I'm thankful for these people, for people like this, for they make the world a better place. Their spirit of service is summed up in these three little words, and then some.
I love it. What a phenomenal poem. And thank you for sharing that at the breakfast and the book, 212 Degrees. I'm going to make sure I check that out. Chris, you are a true inspiration. I have so much gratitude, not only for what you do at Saga and in the great company and the people that you serve there, but also what you do for our industry and serving on the NAB and the RAB and the Broadcasters Foundation of America, which is a phenomenal organization. I really, truly appreciate you being a steward in this industry because it's something I love and I think we all love and are really proud to be a part. One last bonus question I'd like to ask you, because I think you're so truly inspirational and motivational. What would be your advice for people that are radio people as a whole that are wondering about our future as a business and where we're headed?
Well, we have our own thoughts on that as a company, and the disruption that we're going into this digital space is critical to us and to our growth and to our survival, in my opinion. But it also was important that we preserve and protect and to lift up our core competency, which is and always will be radio. I'm a radio rat. I said that in the onset. I always will be one. Ed was a pure play guy. I guess more specifically to our company, what we're doing is we're moving in a direction that we have to go in order to be successful. And we are highlighting the role that radio plays in the what I call the consumer journey, how they interact with products and services. And what happens when they do that? And what role does radio play? I go to cocktail parties all the time or dinners, and they'll say, "What do you do?" And I say, "Well, I'm in radio." And they'll go, "Well, does anybody still listen to the radio?" And now you're on the defense. It's like, of course they still. What are you talking about? Of course they do. And then you're in that kind of a conversation. I never like to play from the defensive. I always like to be on the offensive. I don't play well from a defensive position. I don't think a lot of people do. But I would say that people are our most important resource. And if we can get our people as a leader to first create a vision and then get our team members to see the vision with us and understand it and then to follow it, and then we manage to that vision every day, now you've got a real north compass. But the vision doesn't happen without purpose. So I would say that whatever somebody is doing, whether they're in our business or another, be deliberate, have a purpose, and be authentic. You do those three things and take care of your people first, there's not a lot you can do to fail.
Thanks for listening to Chachi Loves Everybody. If you like the show, we hope you leave us a 5-star rating and tell your friends. Make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This has been a Benztown McVeigh podcast production. Hosted and researched by Dave Chachi Dennis. Executive producer, Darren Silva. Producer and editor, Jake Urbanik. Show coordinator, Estefania Padilla. Marketing and distribution, Suzanne Aksu and Robbie Gessel.